people understood very quickly that it was necessary to organize, to establish bonds, to cooperate with one another, so as to live in peace and security on this shared territory. These people understood that sticking together, expressing solidarity, is not an option, a way of becoming stronger. It was a precondition for their very survival. And it is for that very reason that we naturally support all initiatives which support international cooperation and solidarity so as to achieve our common objectives, that is peace, development, and the well-being of all. For that same reason, we rise up against all initiatives or any actions which undercut the international community's efforts directed at achieving peace and development. Drawing on these principles, the people of Niger unreservedly condemn the Israeli genocide in Gaza. We unswervingly support the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state. Much like Niger firmly condemns the Israeli aggression against Iran and Qatar, we also rise up against the trivialization of violence in the DRC, in Sudan, and in the Sahel, while the international community looks on indifferent. And in fact, some elements of the international community, some foreign powers are complicit in what's happening in the African continent. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, actors directly getting involved in conflicts are not the only ones responsible for the insecurity and uncertainty our world faces today. Niger would also like to denounce the inaction of all those who do have the means to act to promote truth and peace. The silence of those who do have a voice, the indifference of those egoists who stand ready to destabilize entire countries or regions in their own interests, the lack of humanism on the part of those who work in underhand ways to sow death in other countries, and the foolishness of those who betray their motherland and their continent. President, ladies and gentlemen, inaction, indifference, complicit silence, as well as subversive and underhand actions to destabilize the situation, violent disinformation campaigns, information wars. This is the reality that my country and the Confederation of Sahel States, the ASS, are facing as we combat imported terrorism backed by sponsors. Niger, in particular, has been living through this since the 26th of July 2023. That is the date when the sovereign people of Niger decided to take destiny into their own hands. We must grasp the complexity of the tragedy unfurling in the Sahel, the challenges it throws up, the ins and outs. This is necessary to understand not only the game various actors are playing, but also the determination of our people and their governments to fight for victory, to tackle this challenge, regardless of the time and the sacrifice this will require. We will be defending our countries to ensure our survival. We will be defending our territory and our people. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the usual narrative states that the situation in the Sahel can be explained away by the fall of the Gaddafi regime in 2011 and the collapse of the Libyan state, which resulted in armed groups being unleashed in our region and large quantities of weapons flowing into that same region. Others might mention the victory of the people of Algeria, a victory over terrorism which they achieved in the 1990s, which as a result pushed the conflict to the Sahel as terrorists found refuge in the Sahara and the Sahel. We must add to that the indisputable fact that as Western powers and armies set up shop in the Sahel countries, in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso in particular, to supposedly help these countries to combat terrorism, what we actually saw is terrorist phenomena in the region expand and intensify. Furthermore, it is also held up as an indisputable truth that the the main leaders of these terrorist movements do not come from the Sahel. It's also necessary to underscore that they have vast logistical means, a specific modus operandi, and exhibit blind, unheard-of violence, which is completely foreign to our geographical and cultural space. Indeed, our countries, throughout our history, have known wars in the name of religion, we've seen rebellions, but we've never seen such bloody, gratuitous, indiscriminate violence on a scale that we're experiencing now. For all of the above reasons, I'm sure you'll agree that this is deliberately imported terrorism that we're facing. Madam President, this is also sponsored terrorism, and this throws up the actual genuine issue of terrorism financing and the destination of all of the resources terrorists have been capturing for over a decade now. How can we understand the fact that terrorists have maintained the war effort over such a long period of time? We must also point out the happy coincidence which saw in Kidal, in Mali, a stronghold for terrorists liberated in the third trimester of 2023, quarter of 2023, at the same time when the French army was leaving the Niger. The government of Niger, much like those of Mali and Burkina Faso, regularly informed international public opinion of the evidence we've collected, evidence of the involvement of a number of foreign powers in the destabilization of the alliance of Sahel states and of the support they're providing to terrorists. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, speaking from this rostrum, I'd like to condemn the self-avowed support of France to terrorism in Sahel and in particular in Niger. Indeed, since French troops were cast out from Niger in 2023, as announced, the government of France has established a subversive, underhand plan to destabilize my country. It involves sending intelligence to, training, funding, and equipping terrorists. Unfortunate attempts to create the conditions for inter-ethnic conflicts in Niger and in the Sahel, a disinformation and misinformation campaign to discredit my country, our institutions, our political leaders, and our army. France has also maintained and fueled ongoing political tensions between my country and some of our neighbors. On top of that, we must mention the economic and financial war, an unprecedented war which betrays France's hateful desire to thwart any and all of our development projects by disincentivizing investment and systematically voting against my country in all international financial institutions, whether that be the African Development Bank, the World Bank, or the IMF. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, what's happening today in our region, in the Sahel, and specifically in Niger, is the result of a number of factors. First, unpaid colonial debts. These debts must be paid off. Our people never forgot the unheard of violence which characterized the colonial occupation. The infamous Voulet Chanoine mission and other military expeditions which stood out because of all the death and the large-scale torture which they unleashed in Terra, in Junju, in Duchi, in Koni, in Tessawa, and in Zinda, and this in a matter of years. In Zinda, as you know, there were even executions. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, speaking from this august rostrum, my country, Niger, entreats the world's conscience to point out this hostile force which has, since the 19th century, never laid down its arms and which continues to wage total war against my country. Here is evidence of this. In November 2021, in Terra, young demonstrators were assassinated by the French army. The threat of military intervention on the part of ECOWAS has been instrumentalized by France. We must call a spade a spade. The abject terrorism behind which France stands, committing vile crimes in the ASS, For instance, those committed in Fambita on the 21st of March 2025. 44 Muslims were executed in cold blood while they were at Friday prayers. This rostrum also gives me an opportunity to pay a tribute and to think about all of the civilians and the soldiers who gave their lives shot down by the enemy. These crimes remind us of those committed by France in Niger, and this ever since 1899. Crimes which remain an open wound on our collective memory. In the name of human rights, I recall the innocent victims of the Central African Mission. I recall cities and villages which were pillaged and set on fire. I recall the carnage in Junju and Lugu. I recall martyr cities, Korenkalgo, where the population was entirely exterminated. In Beni Nkoni, where over 7,000 people were thrown into mass graves. I'm recalling pregnant women eviscerated, their fetuses left for the vultures to claim. I speak on behalf of raped women and hanged little girls. I speak on behalf of men shot dead and members of the resistance decapitated. On behalf of my country, Niger, I solemnly demand that France shoulders its duty of remembrance, to shoulder its duty of remembrance and to recognize its crimes. To recognize its crimes. On this note,